On March 4th, 2025, a woman pulled into my bay in a 9-year-old Corolla that would not start in her driveway that morning. She had already had it towed once. She had already been told over the phone that it was probably the battery. And if it was not the battery, it was the alternator. And if it was not the alternator, well, on a car this age, it could be the starter. And none of those are cheap. She handed me a quote before she even said hello. Battery. Charging system diagnostic. Alternator. Pending inspection. Labor. Tax. It came to just under $900, and she was already bracing to hear that it would be more. Today, I am going to show you why a no-start Toyota is one of the most misdiagnosed, overcharged problems in the entire repair world, and why the real fix is often something you could buy for about $8 and do in your own driveway before lunch. I want you to picture how she felt, because I've watched hundreds of people feel exactly the same way. The car is dead. It clicked at her that morning, then went silent. The dash had lit up like a Christmas tree the day before. She'd read online that these are the classic signs of a dying battery, and she'd half convinced herself the car was on its way out. By the time she reached me, she wasn't asking if it needed a battery. She was asking how much. I didn't reach for a battery. I didn't reach for a scan tool first either. I opened the hood, looked at the 2 posts on top of the battery, and I already knew. On the negative terminal, there was a crusty, ashy, blue-green bloom of powder creeping out from under the clamp, the kind of buildup that looks like something spilled and dried. I wiggled the clamp with 2 fingers. It moved. That was the whole problem. 20 minutes later, that same car fired up on the first turn of the key, and it has started every single morning since. I didn't install one new part. The battery she was ready to replace was perfectly fine. Here's the uncomfortable truth that the repair industry is very quiet about. A huge percentage of dead battery cars don't have a dead battery at all. They have a bad connection. And a bad connection produces the exact same symptoms as a dying battery, a failing alternator, and sometimes a bad starter, all at once. The car cranks slowly, or it clicks, or it does nothing. The headlights go dim. Warning lights flash on the dash for systems that have nothing to do with each other, the traction control, the power steering, the charging light, because they're all suddenly being starved of stable voltage. To a panicked driver, and honestly to a lazy diagnosis, it looks catastrophic. It usually isn't. Let me explain what's actually happening, because once you understand it, you'll never fall for the expensive version of this again. Your battery does not connect to your car through magic. It connects through 2 clamps bolted onto 2 lead posts. Every single amp your car uses to start the engine, and it takes a lot of amps to spin a starter, has to pass through those 2 small metal joints. That is the entire bottleneck. And those joints live in one of the worst environments in the car. A lead-acid battery quietly vents tiny amounts of acidic vapor. Heat cycles it every day. Over months and years, that vapor reacts with the metal and builds up corrosion, that white, green, or bluish crust, right where the clamp meets the post. Corrosion is the enemy here for one simple reason. It doesn't conduct electricity well. It's essentially insulation growing in the one place you need a perfect connection. So now you have a battery that's full of power, a starter that works fine, an alternator that's charging correctly, and a thin layer of crust choking everything in between. The battery is trying to shove a river of current through a clogged straw. Under the small load of your radio or your dome light, it might seem okay. But the moment you turn the key and the starter demands hundreds of amps at once, that corroded joint can't pass the current. Voltage collapses, the starter groans or clicks, and the car acts stone dead, even though nothing inside it has actually failed. There's a detail here most people never learn, and it tells you a lot. Which terminal is corroded is a clue. Heavy corrosion on the positive terminal often points to overcharging. Corrosion showing up on the negative terminal is frequently a sign of undercharging, which usually means a car that lives on short trips, a few minutes at a time, with the heater, the lights, and everything else pulling hard while the engine barely runs long enough to top the battery back up. That is the daily life of a huge number of Toyotas. School runs, grocery runs, commutes across town. It's not abuse, it's just the pattern that quietly builds that crust on the post. Now, why doesn't the shop lead with this? Why did that woman get a $900 quote before anyone had even cleaned a terminal? I want to be fair here because it's not always dishonesty. Some technicians genuinely don't slow down. A no start comes in. The fastest path to a sale is, your battery's old, let's replace it. And if the car starts afterward, everyone assumes the battery was the problem. Nobody ever finds out that scrubbing the terminal would have done the same job for pocket change. But let's also be honest about the incentives. Cleaning a battery terminal is a 5-minute job that generates almost no money. There's no part to sell. There's no labor to justify. A new battery, a charging system diagnostic, maybe an alternator, that's a real invoice. That's a real ticket. The reset, the cleaning, the simple fix, it doesn't scale. It doesn't pay the shop's rent, so it gets skipped. And the customer never knows there was a cheaper answer sitting right there under the hood. This is where a good diagnosis separates itself from a lazy one, and I want you to know how the professional version actually works, because it's the thing that proves the connection is bad instead of just guessing. It's called a voltage drop test, and it's the only honest way to catch this. Here's the idea. If you put a multimeter across your battery when everything is off, a corroded terminal can read perfectly fine, because at rest, almost no current is flowing, so almost no problem shows up. That's the trap. A resistance check will lie to you the same way. The corrosion only reveals itself under real load. So what a good tech does is put the meter's leads on both sides of the joint, one probe on the battery post itself and one on the cable clamp, and then load the circuit by cranking the engine. On a clean, healthy connection, you'll see almost nothing, a hair above zero. If that joint is corroded, you'll watch a real voltage difference appear across it, sometimes half a volt or more, right there where there should be none. That number is the corrosion. That's the smoking gun. It means power is being burned up as heat in the crust instead of reaching the starter. No guessing, no parts canon, just proof. And here's the part that makes people angry once they see it, because now we get to the fix, and the fix is almost insultingly cheap. You are going to clean the connection and protect it. That's it. For safety, you always disconnect the negative cable first, because that isolates the system and keeps you from creating a spark against the car's body. Wear eye protection and gloves, because you're dealing with dried battery acid and you do not want it in your eyes. Mix about a tablespoon of baking soda into a cup of water. Baking soda neutralizes the acid in the corrosion, so when you brush that solution onto the crusty posts and clamps, it fizzes and lifts. Then you scrub, ideally with a cheap dedicated battery terminal brush, a little wire tool that costs a couple of dollars and is shaped to clean both the post and the inside of the clamp until you see bright bare metal again. Wipe everything down, let it dry, reconnect the positive first, then the negative. And here's the thing, people rush, tighten the clamps so they cannot be moved by hand. Not gorilla tight to the point of cracking anything, but genuinely snug, because a loose clamp causes the exact same symptoms as a corroded one. The last step is what actually keeps this fixed instead of coming back in 6 months. You protect the connection. A pack of anti-corrosion felt washers, the little treated red and green rings that slip over the posts, plus a smear of dielectric grease or a shot of battery terminal protector spray, seals the metal off from the acidic vapor so the crust can't rebuild. A terminal brush and that protection kit together run you about $8. That's the whole fix. $8.20 against a $900 quote. That gap right there is the entire reason I make these videos. Now I promised you honesty, and honesty means telling you when this is not your problem. Because if I only told you the cheap answer, I'd be doing the same thing the upsellers do, just in the other direction. Sometimes it really is the battery. Most Toyota batteries live somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range, a bit longer if you're lucky and the climate is kind. If your terminals are already clean and tight and the car still cranks slowly or clicks, the battery itself is the suspect. The real test is voltage under load, not at rest. A battery can show a healthy number sitting still and still collapse the instant you ask it to crank. A strong one shouldn't sag below roughly 9.5 volts while the engine is turning over. If it dives into the 8s, that battery is done, and no amount of terminal cleaning will save it. Sometimes it's the alternator, and the tell there is different. If your car starts fine, but the battery keeps dying, or the charging light stays on, or your headlights pulse and dim while you're driving, that points at the charging system, not the connection. And sometimes it's the starter. The classic sign is a single loud click with a battery you've already confirmed is strong and terminals you've already confirmed are clean. That click is often the starter solenoid engaging while the motor itself refuses to spin. Clean terminals don't fix a dead starter, so the honest order of operations is simple. Look at the connections first, because they're free to inspect and cheap to fix. Test the battery under load second. Then look at charging and starting. What the industry does is run that list backwards, starting with the most expensive thing, because the expensive thing pays better. What you should do is start with the $8 thing, because most of the time that's where the problem actually lives. That's the whole shift I want you to walk away with. A dead-acting Toyota is not a death sentence, and it is very often not even a real failure. It's a bottleneck, a crusty little joint the size of a coin, choking off a perfectly good battery. Once you know that, a no-start morning stops being a panic and becomes a 2-minute inspection. You pop the hood, you look at the posts, and before you authorize a single dollar of repair, you clean, you tighten, you test, and then you decide. The woman in the Corolla drove away for the price of a coffee, and the only thing she lost was the fear that her car was falling apart. If this changed the way you look at a no-start car, hit that like button so more Toyota owners see it before they hand over their credit card. Subscribe if you want more of these mechanic-side breakdowns that put the knowledge back in your hands instead of leaving it under the hood where you can't see it. And if you've ever been quoted for a battery, an alternator, or a starter when all your car really needed was a clean connection, tell me about it in the comments, because those stories are exactly why this channel exists.